Happy Friday and welcome to Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge, found at riversedgepgh.com. I'm your host, Matt Gajka, and it is my distinct pleasure to be back with you again. Thank you to Brian Crawford for engineering and producing this week's show, coming at you live on this Friday morning. And, well, it's been a little while since I've been in the studio, a couple of weeks to be exact, as I was busy in the NICU at Children's Hospital. Bit of a scare with my first son, my first child. Lucas came into the world, well, it'll be 11 days ago now, and my wife and I had some scares with him as far as his breathing and everything, but we were able to at least get that under control. The doctors and the nurses out there at Children's were outstanding, and they took care of us. Took us in. We were staying with little Lucas in the room in the NICU, and so that was quite the experience, quite the life-changing experience. And so as a result, I was not in the studio last week to record a new episode. And if you listened to my previous episode here, I had my wife Jillian in the studio, and we were discussing exactly what was to come and how that might change things and how it's changed my life particularly is, well, number one, probably sleep schedule, among other things. So I hope that I'm coherent enough to at least bring you a decent show on this Friday at the end of what was a momentous week for our country as well as just myself. So I'm going to tie that in. We're going to talk some politics, believe it or not, on Gike's Got Game, at least in one way, how it relates to the sports world and how these transformational moments can have impacts and can completely alter the course of events as we initially predicted them. But first, I want to let you know that you can follow me on Twitter at Matt Gajka. That's MattGajtka. I'm also on Facebook, Matt Gajka Sports Media. And you can find the River's Edges accounts at those two areas, those two locations, and we are streaming live, by the way, on Facebook this morning, in addition to our usual audio stream at riversedgepgh.com. So, as I sat down last night thinking about how I was going to tie in the election of former reality TV star and business tycoon his entire life, Donald Trump, to our nation's highest office. And yes, it still is really strange to say. I have to admit, at first I thought it might be a forced comparison, but the more I considered it, the more I mulled it over, there are some definite parallels with sports. And, well, first of all, just in terms of the upset factor, I can't say I ever once considered that Donald Trump would defeat Hillary Clinton until the night of the election. And it shocked me, and I know my friend across the way here, Brian Crawford, probably felt a similar thing. Brian, did you ever consider that Trump could win until Tuesday?
No, I didn't think he stood a chance, and to quote a friend on Facebook, he said that he didn't realize that Mike Tomlin was running the Hillary Clinton campaign because she was supposed to win that one, and she lost to an underdog.
Now, don't steal my thunder for later in the show, because there will be a Mike Tomlin mention in regards to that. And Brian, I didn't get a chance to listen to your show after Election Day, but I'm sure part of what you've been maybe thinking back to is, well, did we miss something? Did we overlook something that should have allowed us to predict what happened on Tuesday?
Actually, I had predicted early into the Republican primary that I felt Donald Trump was possibly the only candidate that would be able to beat Hillary Clinton.
Wow, okay.
And the reason why I said that was because I felt the fact that nothing would surprise you. There was going to be no October surprise about Donald Trump that was going to turn heads or shock and awe, and without that shock and awe factor, it's kind of like Bill Clinton with the sex scandals. Oh, it's just a bill.
Right.
Well, whatever Trump does, it's just going to be, oh, it's just Trump. No one's going to be surprised. And really, without that shock, you're not going to detract anybody from voting for him who had already made up their mind.
There is I think, a desire to cover politics like sports sometimes, Brian, and And there's the matchup game you're talking about. There was nothing that could necessarily surprise people about Donald Trump, even as the Entertainment Tonight tapes came out, even as sexual assault accusers came out against him. He was already at that level of like we talk about with Mike Tyson used to be at that level, the Tyson zone, as columnist Bill Simmons used to call it, where you wouldn't be surprised about anything that happened with him. Interesting to hear you say that about Trump, because I felt that Trump was the only Republican candidate that I felt confident Hillary Clinton could defeat. So you had two very flawed opponents. It was kind of like in sports when you have two, I don't want to say underdogs, because Clinton would not be that, considering how she was pushed through the Democratic primary process. But two teams, if you will, two contenders with serious flaws. So I think either side could be fairly confident going in that, well, there was something to at least attack. And to be honest, when you look at the final popular vote numbers, it's essentially a draw. So I think it came down to just obviously a couple of states and the way we conduct elections in this country from a presidential standpoint. There's always the opportunity for some sort of a surprise in the Electoral College, and we saw that right here in Pennsylvania. So yeah, I'm just glad to get your side of the table here, and I hope you had a good election night as well. At what were you right here in Millvale, right?
Yeah, we were at Cousins, and actually tonight this morning after your show will be my first time back since that broadcast.
Oh, okay.
So we'll be talking about that. But to talk about sports, I mean, there is a game to politics using the Electoral College system, and Donald Trump played it perfectly. He got the states that he needed to win. And he targeted those states. He was in Pennsylvania a lot, and he was in certain areas of Pennsylvania, while Hillary stuck to really areas she was already strong in, such as Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. Donald Trump took to areas where there were a lot of blue-collar Democrats, some of the old blue dog Democrats, and he was able to flip those to his side.
Again, there's the game plan, the horse race aspect of politics. It was definitely evident this week and how things turned out. So thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. I know I wanted to check in with you because, well, you don't shy away from the political topics on your show. And again, Brian had an election night broadcast from Cousins right here in Millvale. So good to see us getting engaged with the political scene. And sorry I couldn't make it. Wanted to make it down, but clearly I was otherwise occupied across the river in Lawrenceville. And I have to say, the east end of Pittsburgh is really vibrant, and it was the one bright spot of being holed up at Children's Hospital was getting a chance to take in all that Millvale, East Liberty, Garfield, Friendship, Bloomfield, all that had to offer. I'm hoping to get back there more often and patronize some of those businesses more often. Excuse me, I'm sniffling like Trump at the debate, so there's another tie-in. But my real takeaway from what happened this week in American politics, in our country, is the desire that people had for change, in some cases change for change's sake. And I've seen exit polls that say some people just wanted to shake things up. They didn't really care who it was, just as long as it was outside the establishment, so to speak. And, well, Trump certainly fits that bill. And so those people got what they wanted. But it reminded me of sports fans, and when their team is not doing well, you often hear that phrase thrown around too, change for change's sake. Much like with a presidential change, and especially one like this election, where the outsider comes in and with the promise of shaking things up and at least throwing the status quo out of whack. It's like with a coaching change. A new coach brings the promise of productive upheaval. Something's wrong, and the new guy or gal, in whatever case, will fix it, or at least try to, and stop it from getting worse. And all we have to do is look back to about a year ago here in Pittsburgh with the Penguins, and when Mike Johnston's Pens were looking not just lower in the standings than we thought, but they were looking less like the explosive offensive team we thought we were going to get here in 2015-16. So the Penguins Brain Trust decided that it was time to make a switch, and in their foresight, in Jim Rutherford's foresight in particular, he hired Mike Sullivan to coach the AHL, Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, just in case there was someone that was needed to step in and take over and revamp things and look at it from a different perspective. But you know what? I've also thought that even as well as the Mike Sullivan switch played out last year, a new deployment led to a more effective use of the resources that were already there at, well, what was once Consol Energy Center, now PPG Paints Arena. Much like with that, though, the promise can often overwhelm the real-life aspects, what will practically happen. And much like with a new coach, a new president has checks on his power. A coach doesn't have much control over the players he has. That's the purview of the general manager. A coach doesn't have much say in the way of how much a team will spend. Just ask Clint Hurdle, the Pirates manager. I'm sure he'd like to see the Pirates be a little bit higher up in Major League payroll, but that is Bob Nutting's purview, and that is Frank Coonelly's purview when it comes to baseball operations and how to best allocate funds to the baseball side of the Pirates business. Much like a president has to accept the rulings of the Supreme Court, the judiciary branch. That is a parallel to how a coach must work with what is out there, must work with the framework that has already been established. And much like a coach doesn't have any kind of jurisdiction over what division or what conference his team plays in, the difficulty of competition. Mike Sullivan, when he took over last year, couldn't move the Penguins from the Metropolitan Division somewhere else to the Atlantic, where it would have been an easier path to victory, so to speak. Clint Hurdle can't move the Pirates, unfortunately, out of the National League Central, away from what is looking like to be a juggernaut Cubs team for years to come. Mike Tomlin can't pick up and move the Steelers away from the AFC North. Much in that way, the president can't dictate who is in charge in Congress. Of course, Congress very critical. Despite the power of executive order, the president can't pass a bill into law without help from Congress. And as we're about to see with Donald Trump, he's going to have a very sympathetic, I think, Congress. And with the judicial branch, he'll have the opportunity to lean that more conservative. So he'll have the buy-in, so to speak. He'll have the other sides of the operation, at least for the first 2 years of his presidency, right where he wants it to be. So in that way, it's almost like when you bring in someone like a Bill Belichick to make a football reference, like Mike Holmgren used to be when he had bargaining power. He wanted to be not just head coach, but also general manager. As Bill Parcells once memorably said, you want me to cook the meal, the least you could do is let me buy some of the groceries as well. And that's always been an analogy that's stuck in my mind. It's often unfair to ask a new coach to do what he wants to do what he or she wants to do. Again, want to make that gender neutral, but in the context of big league pro sports, it has been all male. If you want him to be able to implement his plan, well, then you have to, I think, in my mind, allow some control over the resources, over the players at the coach's disposal, at the system of play. That's the one area in which a coach has the most control. But even in that case, if you're coming in mid-season, like Mike Sullivan was last year, you have holdovers like Rick Tocchet, like Jacques Martin, who moved down from the press box to take over defense. But you have these other ideas that you're going to have to bounce things off of. Yes, you have ultimate control in theory, but you have assistant coaches. You also have star players like Sidney Crosby and Yevgeny Malkin and Chris Letang and Marc-Andre Fleury, who've been around for a while. They've built up that equity, and I think you'd be unwise to not take their perspective. So a change in leadership is not often the total change in direction that we want it to be. But it's not completely false hope either, because as Mike Sullivan showed last year, sometimes the right deployment, a new idea, can catalyze resources that were previously impotent under different conditions, under different leadership. But if you want a cautionary tale, all you have to do is stay right there, uptown, at PPG Paints Arena, and think back to the start of the Mike Johnston era. The start of his tenure was one with much promise. He was swept into office, if you will, by the playoff failures, at least, of the Dan Bilesma administration. Excuse me. Johnston wasn't the kind of change that the Penguins and their fans could believe in, though, eventually. After several years of the incumbent Bylsma, it was thought that a fresh approach would be enough to put the team over the top, but it wasn't the right approach. And we're about to find out, much like we did with President Obama 8 years ago, sweeping into office on that change and hope platform. Mike Johnston had that on his side, but in the end, the substance wasn't quite there. It wasn't enough to buoy him and the Penguins to success. And before I let you go here on this opening segment of Gike's Got Game, one last parallel, perhaps. Speaking of term limits and the end of the Obama administration after 8 years, the end of the Johnston administration, as far as the Penguins go, was rather short. It had the feel of an impeachment, in fact, more than a peaceful transfer of power as dictated by our Constitution, as dictated by our election laws. Go over to the South Side and the Steelers complex, the Rooney Athletic Complex. Maybe Mike Tomlin is an argument for favor or in favor of term limits in pro sports. Is his message getting stale? Is a shakeup needed over at Steelers headquarters? That's something to think about as the Steelers go into this weekend's matchup against the Cowboys. Losers of 3 in a row, and as Brian Crawford just talked about with me, Tomlin has had a bad habit of losing to teams that the Steelers shouldn't lose to. And at some point, if you're the Rooneys, if you're leadership down at Steelers HQ, do you start to think about making a change, not just for change's sake, but also to fix that particular problem? And there are many candidates out there. There's no guarantee one's going to be better than Mike Tomlin, just like there's no guarantee that our next president, Donald Trump, is going to be better than Barack Obama. Well, they're certainly going to be different. That's the change for change's sake. But there's always that risk in change. And the upheaval that comes with it can not just lead to good things, it can also lead to chaos. It can lead to a lack of structure, and that can ultimately lead to confusion and a lack of success when it comes down to it. And meanwhile, again with the term limits thing, Clint Hurdle has something to prove in his second 4 years as Pirates manager. So he was certainly capable of turning things around, but as most presidents will tell you, that second term can often be the most difficult one when it comes to establishing one's legacy. So Hurdle working on that. Mike Tomlin, well, he's on the FDR plan, as most Steelers coaches are. He gets a lot of time, and for better or worse, we'll see how that all plays out, much like we'll see how the Donald Trump presidency plays out. Again, that is strange to hear coming out of my own mouth, but here we are. One of those unpredictable results that makes life so interesting, I suppose. We'll step out for just a few minutes here on Gike's Got Game, coming to you live from the Millvale studios and talking to you about the intersection of politics and sports. Be right back with you.
Hi, I'm Mike Storer, host of the Awesome Cast, which you can hear right here on River's Edge Radio. We're talking tech, getting geeky every week with people from Pittsburgh in the industry. Go check us out, awesomecast.net, or listen to us right here on River's Edge Radio, Thursday mornings, 8 a.m. after Funny Money.
Back for the second period on Gike's Got Game. And yes, we talk some politics, at least in the tie-ins with sports. And as I continue to do this show, I find myself looking more into the political realm for comparisons, for crossovers, like I said, with the sports world. And I know so many people turn to sports as an escape from politics, but for me, politics is life. And well, obviously for me, sports is life. It's been my career for 10 plus years since I got out of school, and previous to that, it was an obsession as well. Very difficult to separate sports from my life in general, and well, the real world implications of politics are obviously clear, and I think at times we can think of politics as sports and vice versa, but in a lot of ways it's a more serious game, and sports can be, I think ultimately a way to affect social change, to affect social justice, but there's no way to ignore the influence that elections, that the transfer of power in our government, how the government goes about its business. You need to look out for it. You need to be engaged in the process, and that's something I plan to ramp up in the years to come. It's something that comes to mind when you have a child, to be honest with you, and you want to leave a better world. You want to create a better world for your offspring and for our little Lucas at home. Well, he had quite the opening couple of weeks of his life. He got to see the Chicago Cubs win the World Series, and then he got to see Donald Trump elected president. So I'm sorry, Lucas, the next several months may be a letdown in terms of news for you, but I hope the excitement can at least carry you through. And of course, he's not going to remember any of this. It'll be one of those things like, I was born in 1985, and I don't think I remember anything from the 80s at all, whether it be in the world or in my family's home. But you can always look back and say, wow, I came into the world during a pretty crazy time, no matter whether you look at politics, at our country, or something that you might say frivolous like sports is. But yeah, how about that? The Chicago Cubs did win the World Series, and this is a sports show, and I haven't been on the air since that happened. And that, though, is unlike the election. I had a pretty good idea the Cubs were going to do it going back to even the start of the year, after they finished on such a surge in 2015, knocking the Pirates out of the playoffs in the process. And they were bringing back everybody, even with the Kyle Schwarber injury early in the season. And then he came back, and what a storybook finish for him in the World Series. But even with that taken into consideration, and the way the Cubs were coming in as the heavy favorites, sometimes that can be a danger. Heavy favorite doesn't win more often than not, even though it does win more than the rest. It always feels like a risk. You have a lot to lose when you say, well, the Cubs are going to win the World Series, because everyone's looking to knock them off, and everyone's looking to say, well, the favorite lost, so you were wrong. That's, I think, a fundamental or misunderstanding of what probabilities are, much like with Hillary Clinton. And if you look to our friends, our data journalist friends at 538.com, people say, or I've seen it on social media especially, and in my real world life, 538 got it wrong. They were wrong. Well, no, they weren't wrong. In fact, they were the outlet that I saw that gave Trump the biggest chance of victory going into the election, and I thought they overplayed it. They had Clinton at a 2-1 favorite. So how probabilities work, it's essentially a three-sided die. You roll the die, and Trump's name came up instead of Clinton. So he was on one of the three sides. When you think about it, 33% isn't that far-fetched, and that's what 538's projection model had it as. So I'm coming out of this praising 538 and their data-driven approach because so many places elsewhere did not give Trump a chance, and I was admittedly one of those. So there you go. The upset, much like in sports, the big upset. Sometimes you can see it coming, and in a guy like liberal commentator Michael Moore's case, he saw it coming back in July, writing a pretty powerful piece for his website that's gotten some circulation this week. He was spot on. You know who else was spot on? Penguins co-owner Ron Burkle. And I went down this rabbit hole yesterday. Brian Armin Graham of The Guardian in the UK posted a spreadsheet, and I linked to this on my Twitter. Again, Matt Gajtka on Twitter, MattGajtka. I know it's tough to spell, but just follow along with me. You can find the link right there. But Brian Armin Graham went into the election donations, the election cycle donations, political gifts given by sports owners and co-owners, and the biggest gift given by a Pittsburgh sports owner by far in this previous election cycle, and this came back in, I want to say it was March, was from Ron Burkle, previously almost a straight ticket Democrat supporter. He gave $100,000 to the John Kasich, well, not the John Kasich campaign, but a political action committee for the election of John Kasich, at least as the Republican nominee. Kasich hung in there for a while against Donald Trump before falling, and John is from, I believe, McKees Rocks. Is that right, Brian? Do you know?
Yes,
okay.
yes. Mm-hmm.
He's from the area at the very least.
Yeah,
so
McKees Rocks.
There might have been a connection there with Burkle. But he lives out in California. He doesn't live in Pittsburgh. So it seemed like he believed in Kasich's platform. But Ron Burkle, for years and years, was a fundraiser for the Clintons, whether it be Bill, who he became pretty good pals with, and they were business partners as well after Clinton left office in 2000, or Hillary Clinton. But there was some sort of a falling out. And if you go back and read, there's an LA Times article about Ron Burkle and his relationship with the Clintons. And Ron was saying to the reporter that he just didn't feel like Clinton had what it took to win the general election. And he compared Hillary to John Kerry and Al Gore, which seems very prescient now when you look back at it, because both of those candidates for the Democrats essentially played the Republican to a dead heat in the popular vote, but did not win those crucial states you need to win to take the Electoral College. But the parallel that Ron Burkle tied in, and I have to pull up the article at maybe some point here in the next commercial break, Burkle, who has been in a lot of ways the financial might behind the Lemieux Group's purchase of the Penguins, and has been the financial might behind the Penguins' current ownership group. But he said that Hillary Clinton did not made it too complicated, didn't have that simplicity that you need, like Barack Obama did, in terms of what you believe in, and just playing off that level of excitement that never really seemed to be the case for Hillary Clinton. She never really had anything that she stood for that was very evident in her campaigning. And I think we saw that in some of the WikiLeaks emails that came out about the Clinton campaign. There was some discussion. What does this candidate believe in? What are we going to play off of? And there was never really that focus that you saw with the Barack Obama campaign in 2008 especially, and of course in his re-election campaign in 2012. And Ron Burkle saw it coming, and so he supported a Republican for president, which I believe was a first in his long career. Ron Burkle, a magnate who made his money in the supermarket business, and has been kind of a venture capitalist, if you will, in picking up promising companies, promising businesses, mostly in retail, and revamping them and finding their potential and making them into a money maker. That's how he's been able to stay relevant in the business scene. So a voice in Pittsburgh pro sports, if you will. Maybe we should have listened to him in looking to predict how this election was going to pan out. So kudos to Ron for seeing that coming, much like Michael Moore, looking like he had a crystal ball now as we try to look back and figure out why things happened. And I've been thinking about life-changing moments. And Donald Trump's election, clearly one of those, in the lifespan, if you will, of this country, in addition to all of our lives. I think it'll affect all of us drastically in the end, whether it lasts 4 or 8 years, this upcoming presidency. But also, having a baby, a life-changing moment, that can alter your perspective, and it certainly has mine. It's amazing like that, how your brain changes and into protection and parent mode when the baby comes out of the womb. And what a moment it was. It was November 1st, 1:19 in the morning, one of those times you'll never forget. At least I hope I don't forget it. That would mean I'm pretty senile at the end if I do. But for right now, it's a touchstone moment, the biggest moment, it seems like, of my life. But these, I don't want to call them crisis moments, but these hugely emotional moments, they can alter our mental perspectives. And I was thinking along the lines of the Donald Trump election, along the lines of the Chicago Cubs. So that's a life-changing moment, them winning the World Series for so many of their fans, and especially so fun to see the older Cubs fans celebrate. I was thinking, what's the biggest life-altering, life-changing moment for a Pittsburgh sports fan of this generation? And it depends on how you define generation, I suppose, because I'm 31. I really started paying attention to Pittsburgh sports in the mid-90s, mid to late 90s, and I guess I would say Mario Lemieux's comeback would be the first life-changing moment, the one that alters your perspective for me. That came in December of 2000. Boy, that's going to be 16 years ago next month that Mario returned to the ice after a couple of years off. And for me, it was a chance to see a sports great that I had just barely missed out on. I started following the Penguins just after Mario retired in the spring of 1997. So I always felt that, well, not always, but of course I felt that sense of a missed opportunity. I couldn't enjoy Mario while he was playing. So that was the first one for me. The second one, I would say it's the Steelers' Super Bowl 40 win in Detroit. That was the first Pittsburgh sports title that I was on board for and following. That was transformational. And you remember the Bill Cowher Steelers had come up short so many times in the Super Bowl against the Cowboys. Looking forward to that Dallas-Pittsburgh matchup once again this weekend. But it was the third meeting between the two franchises in the Super Bowl back in 1996. Super Bowl 30, the Cowher Steelers losing a close game to the Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin, Jimmy Johnson Cowboys. Or pardon me, at that time, Jimmy Johnson had moved on. But the parallel is still the same, that Cowher had gone to AFC Championship games and lost at home. I think he was 0-3 in home AFC Championship games. Then he lost that Super Bowl the one time he did break through. So he's 1-3 in AFC Championship games at home. And had to go on the road in 2005. You remember that memorably. The Steelers, as the 6th seed, won 3 straight games away from Heinz Field to go to the Super Bowl to earn, ironically, what played out as a home game at Ford Field with so many terrible towels waving. Jerome Bettis in his hometown. That was a transformational moment. I remember in particular Willie Parker's run early in the second half to put the Steelers up double digits. That was particularly massive. So Mario's comeback, the Steelers Super Bowl 40 win, and then the wild card game for the Pirates in 2013, the first time the Pirates had made it to the postseason in 2 decades. So those are my 3, and if you'd like, you can tweet at me, post on Facebook, what's your transformational Pittsburgh sports moment? I've had a couple here in November. It's been eventful for me in my life, but if you look back at your lifespan as a Pittsburgh sports fan, I'm sure you can find a couple of moments that really twisted things around and gave you a fresh perspective. In a lot of ways, a positive one, could be a negative one. Could be Francisco Cabrera's big hit for the Braves to down the Pirates in Game 7 of the 1992 National League Championship Series. Perhaps that is the one that stands out most in your mind. I know I have a friend who lives down in Charleston, a Pirates super fan. Charleston, West Virginia, I'm talking about, of course. He's a fan of the minor league team down there, a big booster. Rod Blackstone, also the assistant mayor of Charleston. Every time I see him and when we talk about the Pirates and their history, he brings up the Francisco Cabrera incident. So clearly that was a life-changing moment for him. We'll step out for just a few minutes here on Geiks Got Game. We'll bring it back for the third period as we get into the latter half of this week's episode. And keep it right here, coming to you live on Facebook and also on riversedgepgh.com.
Would you be interested in developing conscious choice? Would you be interested in creating reactions rather than waiting for one to come? Would you be interested in combining serendipity and synchronicity? Would you be interested in making 1 + 1 = 3? Would you be interested in finding out about full impact mindfulness? If so, I challenge you to join myself, Jim Ellermeyer, a cognitive behavioral health therapist, every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. on the River's Edge, where we will challenge you to allow us to help you help yourself to fully participate in your life. Let the adventure begin.
And we are back on Geiks Got Game. I'm your host, Matt Geitka. To reset, we've been talking about, well, number one, the crossover in politics and sports, and in particular how life-changing moments can change our perspectives. And I just brought up a couple of them in our previous segment here. In the sports realm, of course, the election of Donald Trump, I think, is something we'll be remembering for as long as this country exists. There is really no hyperbole in trying to put his election into perspective, but it does have sports parallels, like I talked about. Trump voted into office on a wave of desire for change, much like fan bases hope for coaching changes. Now, of course, fan bases can't vote for a coaching change. That would be a little scary, I think. Maybe not as scary as voting for the country's chief executive, though. But be that as it may, sports fans don't have those democratic powers, but in a lot of ways they do, to try to influence public opinion, get the energy up for a change campaign, if you will. And we've seen it so many times. coaching changes working out. We've seen it so many times, coaching changes not working out. And so I see parallels between that and the chief executive change of power that we just saw in our country on this past election day. And I'm still getting my head around everything that happened this week, much like I was the previous week. And again, this is my first show in about, well, exactly 14 days. I was on paternal leave, if you will. And thank you for all the well-wishers out there for our son Lucas. He had some problems breathing coming out of the womb, about as scary as a moment as you can have, especially as a first-time parent. Not exactly the type of experience that I anticipated, but you never know with the way things go in childbirth. But the doctors at both West Penn, and I want to shout out West Penn. That's where we started, and also the folks with UPMC at Children's Hospital. I came out of there with just a tremendous appreciation and admiration for those in the medical profession. Everyone's so kind. Bedside manner is an important thing for me, and I'm sure many others. And the nurses and the doctors at Children's in the NICU, the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, they were spectacular. And we felt at home, even though that was not a place that we wanted to be, my wife, Jillian, and I, who was my co-host in the previous edition of Geiks Got Game. That was one of the more enjoyable shows I've done here in the Millville studios. We've been alongside each other in close quarters in the NICU for the past couple of weeks, but we finally got Lucas home yesterday, and that was a real milestone to reach, something that we wondered when it would happen, but then Lucas improved quickly. And just again, thank you to everyone who reached out, whether it be on social media or elsewhere. Thank you for your support there. But I got to watch the end of the World Series in Lucas's hospital room. That was fun. He was asleep. My wife was asleep, but I just couldn't go to bed with the championship in the balance, that rain delay after midnight. Speaking of things we'll never forget, with the game tied 6-6, Game 7 tied 6-6, and you're wondering, are they going to have to come back the next day to finish this? Fortunately for all of us, I think they didn't have to do that, although that would have been fun. Looking forward to almost a sudden death scenario in baseball for about 24 hours. Imagine that ramp up, that hype. If you thought Game 7 hype was big, think about another 24 hours to prepare, or 20 hours or so to prepare for the 10th inning of Game 7 of the World Series. But the Cubs did win it, and I found myself pulling for them more and more. I wanted to see those fans collect one of those life-changing moments that we've discussed on this program, and that indeed did happen. So congrats to the Cubs and their fans. Easily the best team in baseball this year, and there's that logical side of my brain that loves to see not an upset, but the opposite of the upset, the best team winning when the postseason begins. And I've discussed on this program before how I'd like to see a de-emphasizing of the postseason and a re-emphasizing of the longer haul. There's no longer haul in baseball. It's 162. The Cubs won, I think, 103, 104 games, the most in several years, the most this decade in Major League Baseball. So it was satisfying for me from a logical perspective, from the side of my brain that likes to see things make sense. It was satisfying for me to see the Cubs prevail, even though they needed to come back from 3-1 down. That's why you play these 7-game series. And in the 7-game series, the better team doesn't always win, but it wins more often than not, and I think we saw that play out. But there was one part of the World Series that didn't give me the warm and fuzzies, and that was the continued usage of the Chief Wahoo logo by the Cleveland Indians. And I brought this up briefly 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think it was 2 weeks ago, the previous episode, when the Indians had clinched the American League pennant. It blows my mind, much like it blows my mind that the Washington football team continues to go by Redskins, that the Indians would continue to roll out this racist caricature. It's ridiculous. If you try to apply what that logo represents, a basically red face cartoon, and you try to apply it to other races, to other ethnic groups, it seems more and more ridiculous. Can you imagine a caricature of a black person on the cap of a baseball team? Can you imagine the caricature of a Jewish person, of a woman for that matter, on sports team apparel as the logo for a major organization, a major corporation, which is what the Cleveland Indians are? I just can't believe this is still a thing. And part of maybe the benefit of having it be on the public stage and having the Indians trot out the Chief Wahoo cap over and over again, and they had alternatives. They have the C that they could wear on their hat that's become their de facto primary logo. With alternatives, they still rolled with that. They still have Chief Wahoo on their sleeves. It's brazen racism. And I know that no one in the Indians organization, or at least I hope they don't, think that Native Americans are second-class citizens, but you look at the way they've been treated in the history of our country from day one, I think actions speak louder than words, and it seems like a minor thing, I know, in terms of that. You look to the way the oil pipeline controversy is going on in North Dakota, and how native lands are being disrespected once again, and how we are going back on our treaties and our agreements with these First Nation peoples, as they're called in Canada. And I tend to like that characterization, the First Nation. That's it makes a lot of sense. They were the first ones here. And taking away Chief Wahoo is just a small gesture, but I think it would have a great impact. And they're symbols for a reason. I know that the literal symbol doesn't have a lot of meaning on the surface literally, but it does figuratively. It does emotionally. And you look at Washington continue to call themselves the Redskins. You look at the Indians continuing to roll with the Chief Wahoo logo, secondary or not. I don't see the downside to changing. Yes, people would be upset that their childhood team has switched its imagery up, just like any fan base is sometimes upset when there is a change in branding and marketing. But just look at it from a purely corporate perspective, and I hate to do that, but you could make a lot of money from changing up the logo. You could make a lot of cash from new merchandise. So I think it's a win-win. You get the goodwill of a large segment of the people who are bothered by Chief Wahoo, and you also get the benefit of fans being compelled to buy new jerseys, new caps, new sweatshirts, new apparel in general, new anything, to keep up with the changing imagery of their team. And there's such a great possible nickname there, such a great possible nickname in the history of the Cleveland Baseball Club, the Cleveland Spiders. Think about the imagery you could play up there, and there's only one Spiders, I think, in North American sports, and that's the University of Richmond. You could really own that brand, and I don't think it's excessively minor league. It's nothing like we saw this past week this past month with the establishment of the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp. It's nothing that ridiculous. A spider's a good mascot. It's menacing. It's in a lot of ways whimsical too. And if you look online, there are plenty of people who have already drawn up mock-ups of what a Cleveland Spiders logo would look like. So that's just one alternative. It doesn't have to be that. But the Cleveland baseball team was called the Spiders way back at the start of the 20th century. That was before nicknames were more formalized. But I'm not holding back on my view that Chief Wahoo must go. It's time. The World Series put it on the world stage, and if I were an Indians fan, I'd be embarrassed by all that logo represents. Time for our final break. We'll bring it on back for the conclusion of Gike's Got Game. Overtime on the way right here on the River's Edge.
Come on, go! It's green! Come on! Go!
God damn it, Brian. You need to calm down
Yeah,
with
I'm
the road
sick of
rage.
these people, these assholes.
The road rage, man. You gotta calm down on the road rage.
Well, I want to get to where we're going. We have a lot of great stuff coming up. We're going to Falling Water,
Bicycle heaven.
the Mattress Factory,
Tuck knob.
Trundle Manor. All right, which way do I go? Which way do I go? Come on,
right,
come on.
Right.
Too late now.
Right, come on.
Well, too late now. I got to keep going. I'm not going to sit here like some asshole.
Oh, come on, man.
All right, you're listening to the Culture Cruise. You can find us at riversedgepgh.com.
Your local Pittsburgh area museum podcast.
Yes, riversedgepgh.com, and come take a ride with us.
The Culture Cruise podcast promo you just heard. That's a really cool idea that I'm glad that Brian Crawford implemented here at River's Edge PGH. And thanks to Brian and Tom and Sarah for all their support over the past, how many months now I've been doing this program, going back to the start of July 2015. So it's been over a year. And this is episode 61. So many in the books, and you can find all of them at riversedgepgh.com. In particular, the most recent episode, or Geico Scott Game 60, included my wife, Jillian. We talked about what it was like, basically what it's been like to be a sports fan and work on the inside. She's worked for a sports team, much like I have, and now she's observing as I have been reporting on the Pirates and also the other major pro teams and college teams in Pittsburgh. And so she's privy to a lot of inside information and how that's changed her viewpoint on sports. And also she had a very passionate take on the NFL's continued struggles with domestic violence and its response to that. That's a cause very near and dear to her heart. That was right at the end of the previous episode. And also my brother joined me, a doctor of physical therapy, currently working on the West Coast. We were talking Ben Roethlisberger and his ability to come back from injury, maybe a little too fast, as we once again learned on Sunday against the Ravens. Ben Roethlisberger dropping to 2-6, or the Steelers dropping to 2-6, I should say. It's not all on him in his first game back from a major injury, but that was one of our topics of conversation, how he is able to get back on the field quicker than people think. So it was a family affair. We were family on Geico Scott Game last time out. You can find that again on the podcast page. I do two things, or I talk about two things in particular right at the end of every episode: ban the cliche and the final number to wrap up Geico Scott Game. My cliche, I won't have much to say on it outside of I think it sounds ridiculous and I'm tired of hearing it. It's no love lost, and it came up in context of the Steelers-Ravens matchup this past weekend. These two teams have no love lost for each other. It's just a strange way of saying they don't like each other. There was never any love, so why talk about it being lost? It wasn't misplaced. It was never there. So that one has always bothered me, and it's a little pretentious, a little too literary for its usage in a lot of ways. I'm not against different types of language, different tones of language when we're talking about sports coverage, but no love lost. We can toss that one into the cliche garbage bin. It's been banned. It joins the cliches banned, the long list of cliches banned here on this episode, on this program, I should say. And in this episode, our final number is 18, as in the minimum number of years that Jillian and I will have our son Lucas under our roof, and thinking about the ways that sports will impact his life. I mentioned he was, at least present as the Chicago Cubs won the World Series. His first Pittsburgh sports event that was on TV while he was awake. I'm not saying he watched it, but it was Penguins-Kings the other night from Los Angeles. He saw Sidney Crosby score a goal. In fact, in his first 5 days of life, Sidney Crosby had 4 goals. So, he might as well get used to that for at least the next few years. Many more where that came from, I'm sure. But in his personal participation in the world of sports, not just talking about being a sports fan, and believe me, we have the Penguins onesie, the Steelers bib, the Pirates hat for him all set to go. But I hope that he, much like myself, gets enjoyment out of participating in sports. And I'm going to start him with a golf club in his hand. I started at age 2 with a plastic golf club and ball out in the backyard. That's a sport for a lifetime, as we often say. It's brought me so much joy in participating in it. We'll try to get him into hockey. There's a net out in the garage, and that is a sport that has brought me so many positives socially, in addition to just the emotional impact of trying to master a skill. I think that's one of the more important things you can teach a child, is the benefits of discipline and putting in the reps, putting in the time. I've experienced the fruits of that, not just in my career, but also in playing golf and playing hockey. You put in more time, you get better, ideally, and that's a life lesson for a child. So he will be involved in some way or fashion. For me, it took me a little while to really get into the team sports until I was about 11 or 12 years old. So it'll be a part of his life. It won't be the biggest part of his life, but I'm looking forward to, in these coming 18 years, to showing him all the good that being a sports fan and a sports participant can be in one's life. Thanks to Brian Crawford for producing this week's show, coming to you live. I always like doing these live shows when I can. And hey, I'm up anyway after an early morning feeding back at the homestead in Westview. For Brian, this is Matt reminding you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. I'll talk to you next week, I promise, right here from the Millvale Studios on Geiks Got Game.